What's going on, you guys? It's your boy 3 in this thing, baby, representing TKOG. Today I'm going to be talking about hand trap psychology and why it's so imperative to just understand the psychology behind how hand traps work this format, when you should, when you can, when you should not, and understanding game state. So there's a rule of thumb that I follow with hand traps. Not everybody likes it. It is a necessary evil. Um, we honestly are at a point in the game where like hand traps almost feel necessitated because board breakers are being played around with like standard inboards that go uninterrupted, which makes you feel that you have to almost interrupt the board and at least make your opponent in on a half board. So there's two different approaches. For example, let's say I have multiple hand traps and I have an imperm in my hand. If I'm playing against Snake Eyes, I feel very confident in the fact that they're going to play through my low impacts. So oftentimes I hold my imperm to play into their board, even though it doesn't respect talents. And you should try and check talents. The fact of the matter is they're going to force talents either way because you need multiple hand traps to stop their turn. And because you need multiple hand traps, it means you're going to play into talents. If you don't play into talents, you're not hand trapping them. And if you're not hand trapping them, then their inboard's just going to be too oppressive anyways. So whether you hand trap them or not, you can not play into talents and lose to their engine, or you can play into the non-engine to try and mitigate as much of the inboard from the actual engine that they have produced, right? And holding imperm is very smart. If the only hand trap you have in your hand is impermanence or ghost ogre, playing into the fire matchup, it is very wise and prudent to just hold it in your hand so that when you're playing into your opponent's board, the imperm can check the Appaloosa, or it can also, the imperm can check the Appaloosa, but the ghost ogre can check both Oppo and IP. As you guys can clearly see here, I had Ash, Imperm, Valor in my opening hand. I still chose to Valor the Witch. At the offset chance he had a Bonfire, I knew I was going to Ash the Bonfire. And if he could play through it at that point, I was not going to Imperm anything else. I was just going to hold the Imperm to actually check the half board that he should be ending on. Because Valoring Witch and Ashing Bonfire, if he plays through it, he should not be ending on full board. But if he does, he does. Now, the rule of thumb, the second psychology behind hand traps is like, how many hand traps it's this is like a thing I made up myself. So the amount of hand traps that it takes for you to stop your opponent's turn can determine how many hand traps you have to play into. So my rule of thumb is if my opponent played through 2 hand traps and continued to full combo through them, that means their hand had more engine than it had non-engine, which means their inboard more than likely should be the majority of what I have to play through. So I should not be worrying or considering multiple hand traps for the most part. If I Ash and Valor you, if I Ash your Bonfire and Valor your Snake Eye Ash and you go Diabell Star, odds are you have 1 to 2 non-engine in your opening hand. And it most of the time is going to be 1. Now, if I imperm your Snake Eye Ash, or I Valor it, or I Ash your Bonfire and you pass, then I know for facts that I have a lot of hand traps that I'm going to have to play around. And respecting the hand traps is one thing, but also respecting the fact that your opponent is not already playing is another thing. For example, when I am in a game state that is very simplified, I hand trap my opponent, they pass their turn. I didn't have to do it more than once or twice. I know I'm up against a bunch of hand traps, but I also understand that I need to respect what I lose to. I need to identify my losing condition. What card am I going to lose to? And I need to play around it. So for example, if I hand trap Snake Eyes once or twice and they pass turn, and let's say I'm playing YUGIOH, I don't need to full combo. That's what people don't understand. A, it's going to save time on clock to not waste the 6 to 7, possibly 10 minutes it takes for you to combo playing through hand traps. B, you play less in the territory of the hand traps your opponent has, especially cards like Nibiru. And also C, if your opponent passed, they don't have engine. Now, for example, if they had a duplicate copy of Snake Eye Ash, that's one thing. But if they had a Bonfire, a Wanted, or a Witch, they would have used it. And if they haven't used any of those cards, then odds are they either have a duplicate Snake Eye Ash or they're top decking into engine. So it's very prudent, and I oftentimes do this in game states like this, where I will just simply summon. If I have an extra hand trap or 2, I will literally summon Phantom of Yubel, and I will try and maybe go in for like 1 half combo. Like I might just try and make an SP into a Rage. I won't full Snake Eye. I won't full Fiendsmith combo. I won't go all like Boss of the Walls with all of my U-Ball cards, even though you know you're going to win when you end on that board because your opponent doesn't have engine. It's not necessary, for the main reason being is that it's just running time on the clock. if I know, like I've won so many games like this. I just went undefeated with UBL today, and I had a game state like this playing against Snake Eyes. He literally at the end of the game he had Ogre, he had Mourner, he had Ogre Mourner. He Magnemoted on his turn, like and grabbed a Druid's Worm, and he had I think it was a face down imperm or a cross out, and all I did was literally in my hand I still had a Veiler and an Ogre left, and I top deck into a starter, and I had a way to make Phantom. So what I decided to do was I summoned Phantom. It got Mournered, and I said, wait, he's down to 2 cards in hand and he still hasn't drawn a starter. I have 2 hand traps plus Phantom. I don't need a play. And I passed. And he drew into not a starter, but if he had a starter, I would have checked it with either Veiler or Phantom. And I ended up comboing on the crackback because he couldn't contend with my Phantom. And so my Phantom ended up applying more pressure on the next turn. Even though it got Mournered last turn, it's still up. He didn't play into it. And now I can combo with confidence knowing that my opponent has no starters. I've effectively like neutralized his interruptions that he could have top decked into because he didn't have engine. So now I can use deductive reasoning to say it is hand traps. I need to play around them. What do I lose to here? If I activate the search card and I get drolled and I want to search but don't need to, I'm going to let it resolve. And this is what happens when, like, let's say I have a opening of the Spirit Gates and I have a Samsara D Lotus and a Fiendsmith Engraver in my hand, and I have Phantom of Yubel up. Sure, Droll cuts off the extra search off the normal summon of Becking Beast, and it cuts off the Fiendsmith in my hand, but by allowing the Droll to resolve, knowing that I can full combo under it, I am putting my opponent I'm putting my opponent on. You have to have 2 more hand traps, and they have to be good enough for me to respect them. And the only cards that I'm going to be considering after that are going to be Ghost Ogre and Nibiru, because effect negation hand traps are not going to be good against my deck because they don't trade with the bodies, and the bodies can be converted into Hapaloosas and Yamas and Fiendsmith Link 2s and Silhouettes and so on and so forth. And so you do get to a point where when you are playing hand trap wars or you're in simplified game states, that if the premise of hand traps are to keep your opponent off of engine, that also means that when you begin to play, you don't need to full combo. If your opponent has been hand trapped to the point where they stop playing, you can use deductive reasoning to come to the conclusion that, A, the last cards in hand must be non-engine, otherwise they'd still be playing. So now I want to play the best I can around the non-engine, but I don't want my opponent to be using all of them, because if my opponent uses all of them and I can't play through them and he stops my full combo and he top decks a starter, I'm going to lose. But if I make a half board that doesn't play in a nib and doesn't play into the hand traps I know I lose to, I can pass with bodies because hand traps can't clear bodies, attack for some damage. Like for example in Game 1, if you guys have been watching this duel, my Yubel deck versus Snake Eye, I summoned a Beckoning Beast. It got impermed. I made Almirage. I discarded for cost off Gates. He DD crowed me. I called by that because my game plan was not to make the Moon of the Close Sky. Actually, if you guys saw that, I could have made Moon of the Clone Sky in full combo. Instead, I made SP and I checked the Witch and put him on a clock because I already had extra hand traps and I knew that I ended his turn and he had nothing but non-engine. So I figured, why would I even waste time? Even though this is an online simulator and you don't have 45 minutes, you can play as long as you want. I just do it for good practice because in real life, the 45 minutes is so valuable to me. It matters so much that if I can save an extra 7 minutes to not combo, but still check my opponent's next turn with just a hand trap or 2 and like a Phantom, and in this case for like the fire deck, maybe you're just ending on an IP. Like you just have to really be able to stop, take a deep breath, and say, what is enough? Because if this is enough to me is my opponent doesn't have any engine, so if they top deck a starter, I just need one response for it. And what I also want to do is play around Imperm the best I can, like a top decked Imperm, so I don't want to clear the field completely. So there's just things like that matter. But I think in general, like I said, the rule of thumb is you should not have to worry about an abundant amount of hand traps in your opponent's hand if they played through all of yours and you had a multitude. Now, if I have one hand trap and it stopped my opponent's turn, I should know that I have an uphill battle to play through my opponent's hand traps on my turns. However, if I triple hand trap the Snake Eye player and they played through it, the odds are they have 1, maybe 2 maximum. So the board is my primary focus to play. And if I have talents, I'm going to check the hand, because if I'm confident that I can contest the board, then I'm just going to check hand. And that's where a card like Talents can be very valuable playing into boards going second, because if you know that you can check the board with your engine, then the unknown should be more scary than the known, because the known is already there. You have to develop a game plan on how to navigate through it. The unknown is what introduces all these intricacies and variables and factors that can change how you are even able to sequence. And as long as you're sequencing in such a meticulous way that you are respecting what you lose to, your win conditions to identify what you lose to and play around it, then you should have no problem playing into the board. Now that leads me to the next thing, which is kind of cohesive with what I'm talking about in this video, is if you can't break the board and you know you can't, then don't waste your time trying to break the board, because time exists, and when you lose in time or your opponent burns you with the Fiendsmith engine, you can't be upset with anyone except yourself, because you knew game one was a loss and you still decided to play because you want to be stubborn. People play into boards they can't break all the time, and unfortunately they get punished. It's their fault if they choose that. It is okay to concede. There's nothing wrong with scooping. It's an honorable thing to do when you know that there's nothing else that you can do. You've done the best you can. When you stare at the board and you use deductive reasoning, you sequence in your head. That means you don't play cards and then start thinking. You think and then start playing, and you understand there's no way out of this. I just need a scoop, so I have time for games 2 and 3. It's okay. It's okay. That's not an L. That's a smart thing to do. It's just what you got to do. And sometimes it happens like that. You hand trap your opponent, they play through it, and they have engine plus hand traps, and you can't play through it. You should just scoop. There's no reason, swallow your pride, be humble, just scoop. It's okay to admit defeat and have a chance to still win the entire match. Game 1 is not the end of the world. I just think it's very important. So just don't forget that if you don't take anything else from this video, understand that the amount of hand traps that you should play through is predicated to the amount of hand traps that your opponent was able to play through. That's the most simplest way in layman's terms to put it for anyone who just doesn't watch the video or doesn't listen to all the context, or if you're just skimming through it, because I understand the average American attention span is not the best. The amount of hand traps that you play through is predicated to the amount that your opponent was able to play through. If your opponent played through a lot, you won't have to play through a lot. If your opponent didn't play through a lot, you will have to play through a lot. Hopefully you guys catch that towards the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. God bless you. Make good choices. Don't hurt your brain cells. Don't do drugs. Peace.